we start to learn a new topic, the forecasting, and we still focus on three things: the what is it, why is so important, and how can we use it to improve the operations in a real business. So first, let's take a look at several stock outs examples of infamous Christmas tours. This table here lists the detailed information about the stock outs in history. And the third column here lists the facts, what kinds of things the supplier or the customer or the retainers faced because of the stock outs. And the last column here shows the reasons why was this happened. For example, the first example, the poem. In 1975, because of the forecasted demand is 50,000 units, but actually the actual demand is 150,000 units, it made customers had to wait in line up to 2 hours just for signing up. All examples here talks about the out of stock. If the retainer, if the supplier cannot supply the market the enough demand, the bad things is happened. This is also the first reason I'd like to introduce to you. The forecasting is very important because we need to make sure we understand the demand in the market, and we can make a plan for the production or make a plan with the suppliers what kinds of how much materials we should buy and other operations plan. So this is really important to have a correct forecasting for the demand. But does it mean that we have to keep like the enough inventories, or we need to install the the more inventories, the better operations you will have? The answer is no, because we need to consider a trade-off between the stock outs and overstocks. So we will still introduce this part when we introduce the inventories management. But in order to understand why the forecasting is so important, we still need to understand the inventories. Because for both the stock outs and overstock, they cost. If you don't have enough stock, if you don't have enough inventories, if you make the wrong forecasting plan, then you may lose your customers forever. You may lose the profits you should have, and you may lose your reputation. But what if you store like the inventories which are more than the actual demand the market needs? Then you may lose the opportunity to growth, because the money you invest on inventories, you buy the materials or you buy the final goods or you buy the in process goods, those money you have spent, which means you cannot invest those money to other opportunities, so you lose the chance to grow. And also you need to spend money to hold the inventories you keep. You may need to rent or construct a new warehouse to store the inventories, to store the units you buy, to store the materials. So you still need to spend money. And you may also have a cost of disposal because you have to disposal the old inventory. So in terms of the inventories, we need to make sure we store the appropriate values. In order to have a good inventory plan, we need to understand the market. We need to understand the demand for the market. So we need to have a very great forecasting for the future demand in the market. So this is the first reason I'd like to introduce to you why is the forecasting so important. And the second reason I'd like to introduce is about the development. It's not only about the inventories. The textbook shows us examples between the Boeing and the Airbus. The example here shows us if you don't have the correct forecasting, you may lose the market and you may lose the chance to be developed in the whole business. Forecast is a portion of the whole business. It's connect with the market. It's connect with the production. So we need to make sure we have the correct forecasting. Then we can make the correct plan to align with the whole business strategy. And here is a small discussion part to think about a recent or a very memorable the experience of out of stock. So what kinds of products you want to buy but it's out of stock recently or you remember it. And to think about what what were you shopping for and where you find that product in a physical store or online, and what's your feeling when you couldn't find what you were trying to buy, and how did your disappointment affect your loyalty to the offending supplier. Think about the four questions here and to discuss with your classmates or your roommates or your family members or your friends to talk about what kinds of effects a stock outs may bring. And I can share you something like some experience of stock outs I had experienced. So the first thing I'd like to share is about the face mask. Around the March last year and also the Switch and a game for the Switch. And most recently, the stock out I had experienced is about Lego of piano. So think about ex- those experience about out of stock, and after you answering the four questions, think about if the stock out experience was part of a major news story. Do an internet search to find out what went wrong, and what note the forecasting put in the stock out. So this is the final questions and like you to think about. This is also a way to think about why the forecasting is so important. And then let's move to the second aspect we need to focus on what is a forecast. For a business forecast, we may have a non sentence to describe it. We may need to focus on different dimensions. And I have listed three sentences over there which talks about the business forecast. This is a process of using the analytics, the data, the insights, and experience to make predictions and to respond the various business needs. And also this talks about the forecast, the business forecast talks about how to enable the companies to optimize their business process. And the goal of the business forecast is to go beyond knowing what has happened and provide the best assessment of what will happen in the future and to drive a better decision making. So we can have different ways to describe business forecast. We need to understand the different dimensions, what we need to do and what the business forecast can bring to the business. But actually, we can use a very briefly sentence to describe what the forecast is. A forecast is an educated guess about the future. So we, according to different tools, we connect the data with your analytics, and we, according to the experience, to make predictions for future. And we may have some objectives like we want to make better decisions. We want to optimize the process of our business. Whatever, a forecast is an educated guess about the future, about the things we don't know. So this is what the forecast is. And in terms of the what dimension for this new topic, except for the definition, I also like to introduce you the general process for forecasting. We have 5 steps. The first step, you need to decide what to forecast, and then we move to analyze the data and to select the models, select the tools we need to use to do forecasting, and to create the forecast and to evaluate how the forecast is. For the first one, decide what to forecast. We need to figure out 2 things at least. The first thing is about the category. You want to forecast a specific product, a specific unit, or a group of products. So this is the first thing you need to consider about what the things you want to do forecasting. And the second thing is you need to think about the time period. So you want to do a long-term forecasting like for 10 years or a short-term forecasting for next week or next month. So this is the first thing about the first step of forecasting. Decide what to forecast. And the second thing is you need to know the data. So you need to analyze the appropriate data. It also talks about the 2 things. The first thing, you need to select the data. If you want to know how many units you will sell in next month, if you are planning to sell a new product which is not existing in the current market, you may need to connect the data for a similar products in the market. Or you may, if the product is existing in the market and you want to know the sales, you may need to connect the history data, the history sales for that product. So the first thing you need to consider in terms of the second step, analyze the appropriate data. You need to decide what kinds of data you should choose. You need to select the data. And the second thing you need to focus on about the data, about the right data, is the pattern, the data pattern. And in general, we have 4 patterns. The first one we call the horizontal or the level. It means like the data you plot, you find that your data just fluctuates around a constant mean, just like follow a means, like it just like across a number, a specific number here. So this is what we call the horizontal. The second is about the trend. So you notice that your data has a up upward trend or a downward trend. So it may have a different dimension here, different direction here. This means like the data you connect always have like always increasing or always decreasing. So they had a trend that we call the trend pattern. The third one is what we call seasonal. And I use two lines to represent the data which has been connected. The dark green here represents the year one, and the light green here represents the year two. So you can notice that for different years, they have the same upward trend or the downward trend. So for each year, they have the same shapes here, which we call the data reveals a regularly repeating pattern. So this is what we call regional. For example, the snowboard. So in the summer, the snowboard always have a low demand, and in the fall or the beginning of the winter, the snowboard has a high demand. So every year we have that patterns. So if the data you connect for the time period is always regularly repeat, so this is what we call the seasonal. And the last one we call the cycle. If you still like see a repeating pattern, but it doesn't recur regularly, and it's for a very long time period, this is what we call the cyclical, and it because of the business cycle or the product cycle. This is a normal situation. Like for each product, when we introduce the product design, it always have a product life cycle. So it always have introduced, then growth, then mature, then decrease. And for business cycle, we also need to consider like into the different time years, the whole business environment will have the impact on the demand for products. So this is because of the business cycle or the product life cycle, this pattern happens, what we call the cyclical. It also have a repeat, but it's not a regularly repeat. So this is about the second step, the appropriate data. And the third step is about the method, the forecast method, and we need to consider the four things here. The first thing about the amount and the type of the data. If you if you decide to choose a simple method, which means like you don't need to connect a lot of data or a complex data, but if you decide to use a complex method, you may need a lot of data. So it depends on what kinds of amounts and the type of the data you can connect, then you may need to choose the different method. And the second thing is about the degree of accuracy. If you pursue a high accuracy level of your forecasting, in general, you may need to choose a complex method. But if you do not pursue a very high level of the accuracy of the forecasting, then you may not need, you just need the simple forecast methods like the simple average or the exponential method to make forecasting. And the third thing about how to select the forecast method you need to consider is about the length of the forecast horizon, the time period. In general, the complex macroeconomic require more sophisticated techniques of forecasting. So it depends on the time periods you want to make forecasting. If you want to make forecasts just like for the next month and you have a very recently data, you may not need to choose a sophisticated forecast method or complex method. You can just use the simple way to make forecasting for the next time period. If you consider a microeconomic, you consider a long term, then you may need a better or a more complicated forecasting method. And the last dimensions you may need to consider is about the patterns. We have introduced the 4 patterns of the data. So it depends on the patterns of the data, you need to choose the different types of the methods of the tools you can use to make forecasting. For example, for the horizontal or the level pattern, the data is always fluctuates around the mean. So a very simple way for you to make forecasting for the next time period you focus on is just to compute the average, to compute the mean. Then you will have an overall idea about how many units you may sell in the future. So this is about the 4 dimensions you can consider about when you want to choose a forecast method. And the fourth step of the forecasting process is about the create the forecast. So after you decide what to forecast, after you choose and understand the data you connect, and after you choose the appropriate forecasting model, then you can create your forecast. And the last step of a forecasting process is the assessment of the forecast. It talks about after you forecast and after the actual occurs, then you can compare the actual data and your forecast data and to evaluate how your forecast is. The last thing I like to introduce for this introduction lecture video of forecasting is about the create forecast. And this is what we need to focus on the integrated business planning as we understand why the forecasting is so important because it's a portion of the whole business cycle it related to with other functional departments like the sales, like the marketing, like the operations, we need the production. So in order to avoiding everyone just focus on what they forecast and to get everyone to work together, we have 2 tools. The first one is SNOP and the second one is CPFR. And for the SNOP, it's an internal tools to integrate the business together, to integrate the different functional departments together. Why we call it internal? Because it considerates the internal departments, considerates with the internal functional departments in a business. while the CPFR here talks about external, talks about the customers, talks about the markets. Consider the relationship among an external world and the internal production, the internal business. So we have those tools. And one of the things I like to introduce is about the SNOP. And I like to mention three things. The first thing, the SNOP is a single operating plan. It talks about how to allocate the resources while integrating the different functional departments in a business. So you need to consider the production because you want to satisfy, you want to produce the enough products to satisfy the markets. And you also need to understand the demand. So you need a marketing person to provide you the information about how many units you should produce, and then you need to considering the resources, you need to considering how to allocate the resources, how to how much materials you should buy for the suppliers and others. So you need to consider how to integrate the necessary functional departments in a business, including marketing, selling, operations, information system, and others, to allocate the resources such as the equipment, the employees, the money, the materials, and others. This is the single operating plan. And another thing I'd like to mention is about this is the monthly base. Even though this is not for a short term, like for each month, but for per month, you need to check all of the things. You need to review all of the things in different departments and to review the overall ideas about the whole plan here. But typically, it's over a 24-month learning planning horizon. And another thing I like to mention is about these tools help you to support your objectives in the business, to support the overall goals, overall strategies of your business. So this is SOP. And more details about SOP and the CPFR, the collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment. You can find the details for the topic 10.4 in the textbook. So this is the first video for this new topic, the forecasting, a brief introduction about the backgrounds and about what we need to know before we illustrate the detailed tools, the how aspects of forecasting.